Hello viewers, so as you're already aware and as already pointed out, we would continue with our discussion on different theories of error as propounded and discussed in different texts of Indian philosophy. When I say Indian philosophy, what I mean is classical Indian philosophy. So, in some of our earlier lectures, we have been discussing how how different kinds of errors have been classified within several texts of Indian philosophy. On what could be the different bases on which we could think of classifying errors, because error, per se, is the very meaning, dictionary meaning of it suggests, is seeing of something which is not a part of the fact. So what happens in error is that we happen to perceive something which is not something which is factual in nature. So that being the case, but there could be several such kind of perceptions, so to speak, and all of them may not be at par with each other. So, say for example, as we discussed earlier, say for example, watching a film for that matter, because these are some more modern examples to which viewers probably would relate better. So if we talk about, say for example, movies, films, we pretty well know that what is being projected on the screen is not actually real, in the sense that the people that we see on the screen are not real. So it is, in a certain sense, but the way we think of it is in the form of a story. So we kind of start imagining all those things as if they actually did occur, and so on and so forth. So the point here is that errors could be of different kinds. Say for example, there are sort of errors of other kinds which are not, so to speak, deliberate in nature, in the sense that when we watch films, off and on, we may be aware. We sort of, the point there is we want to lose the awareness that what we see on the screen is not something that's actually happening. The point there is that we want to be in that illusion. We pay to enjoy that kind of sort of an illusion that is being projected onto the screen. On the other hand, there could be certain other kind of errors which have a proper objective, sort of material basis. So, say for example, there are countless examples of it. There could be sort of several examples of it, but the classical examples that we sort of come across is seeing of a piece of silver in an oyster shell, seeing of a rope as a snake. These are some of the classical examples. And then yet again, there are certain other examples like a transparent crystal, but when it is kept on, say for example, a red carpet, or there is something behind it which is red in color, then we see that particular crystal not as transparent, but as if it were colored. But now these sort of, if we look at broad anatomies, so to speak, of these cases, we find that there are some kind of structural differences in all these different kinds of errors. Say, for example, when we talk about rope and snake, or when we talk about silver and oyster shell, there is a proper, some kind of an objective basis to what we happen to perceive. It may not be so to speak factual in nature, but there is definitely some kind of a seeing of something happening here, and there is a definite cause of it. And similarly, when we see a crystal, as colored. We are mistaken mainly about the property of the object concerned, though we see the object as it actually is, but we get mistaken about its property. So, and the cause is very different. The cause is, the sort of a reflection of something in something else. And yet again, if we talk about films, the reasons there are very subjective in nature, maybe in subconscious in experience, because if we identify, if we really we find the film interesting, if we find the content of what is being presented onto the screen interesting, then we tend to forget, the very sort of, the difference between reality and unreality. So the reason there is, more subjective in nature, in the sense that it seems to be pretty clear that, we go to a cinema hall. We know that the screen is blank out there, but the moment a film is projected onto it, we forget. We get kind of get carried away by what's being shown on the screen. And the reason for that is very subjective, because the story that is unfolding on the screen is something that we identify with, that kind of so to speak incites our emotions, and when there is a particular kind of flow of emotions, we tend to lose awareness of what is being projected onto the screen, whether it's real or not. So, and of course, the reason here is more subjective in nature, unlike the other example, namely that of snake and rope. So there, the reason is more objective in nature. There is a particular kind of property which is shared very closely between the two objects, and the perception of that property leads us not to the actual object which is before us, but leads us to the cognition of, rather misleads us to the cognition of something else which is actually absent in the locus. And in other kind of examples, there is actually nothing wrong in what we are seeing. It's just that property of something else is being projected through the other object. So it's like mixing up of properties of two objects which are which kind of coexist in a particular locus. So, therefore, there could be different causes of errors, and depending on the causes of errors, there could be different kinds of classifications regarding error. So now, in some of our last lectures, we sort of we made an attempt to understand the different ways of classifying errors as propounded in Indian philosophy, and we would remember that in our last lecture, we concluded by enumerating different kinds of adhyasas, because error has this extra epistemological importance with special regard to Indian philosophy, because as we are already aware that Indian philosophy, especially in classical Indian philosophy, philosophizing is done for a particular purpose. So it's not a philosophy in the sense of reasoning just for the sake of reasoning. It is, in classical Indian philosophy, we reason, we dwell upon discussions, we surmise on specific issues which actually concern us, which existentially concern us, and therefore any inquiry is aimed towards a specific goal. So that goal could be, say, for example, the knowledge of Brahman, as specified in the very first verse of Brahma Sutras, which states Athato Brahma Jigyasa, which means therefore let's inquire into the nature of Brahman. So the reason for why one is philosophizing is stated very clearly in the very beginning of the text, and in which also sort of precludes the possibility that one could be reasoning just for the sake of reasoning. Similarly, in Mimamsa Sutra, the very first verse states Athato Dharma Jigyasa, meaning let's therefore inquire into the meaning of dharma. So which clearly lays out the sort of some kind of idea regarding what is the specific goal towards which the particular inquiry is aimed at. So so in Indian philosophy, theorizing errors is of a special importance because many of philosophies sort of rely upon sort of giving some kind of a proof that we are in a state of bondage because we don't have, so to speak, right knowledge. And we don't have right knowledge, not having right knowledge in a certain way is tantamount to having erroneous knowledge, erroneous cognitions. So since the state of bondage, in a certain sense, is caused by lack of knowledge, and lack of knowledge in a certain sense is tantamount to erroneous cognition, or sort of conversely sorry, erroneous cognitions are some kind of a species of lack of knowledge. Therefore, explaining what causes error gives us some important cues regarding why, what are the reasons which which could explain the lack of knowledge in particular cases. Now, having understood that, having said that, let's look at sort of some of the reasons and sort of classification of errors, types of errors as propounded by realists, by realist school of thought, and by some of the idealist school of thought in Indian philosophy. So errors, as pointed out earlier, apart from other things, could also be classified on the basis of what is causing it. So now, in that context, if we look at one of the realist school of thought, namely Nyaya, who are sort of realist par excellence, they think of types of errors as follows. So Jayanta, who is one of the very important Nyayika and the author of Nyaya Manjari, writes in his magnum opus that more often than not, an error is invested with a form presented in recollection, and the cause of this recollection varies according to exigencies of the situation. Sometimes it is the cognition of similarity, and sometimes it is due to lust, sorrow, and the like. Somewhere it is the habitual perception of an entity, and elsewhere it is caused by the cataract of the eye. Now it is evoked by somnolence, and then it appears in the wake of anxiety. So what we can see, in this important passage is that Jayanta points out that there could be several causes, and this includes some of these causes could be objective in nature, and some of these causes could be subjective in nature. Say, for example, cognition of similarity. Now, cognition of similarity, as pointed out earlier, say for example in snake and rope example, there is a certain similarity in structure between the rope and snake, or an oyster shell and a piece of silver. We know that they share, a sort of a property of having a certain kind of color. Certain kind of sheen, that's always sort of we find on them. So it may have some such kind of objective basis, but it may also be due to lust, sorrow, and the like. And maybe at times we are habituated to sort of to seeing somebody. Say for example, we know that a particular person is to be found in a particular room in an office. So supposing that person works there, so we always enter the room with an expectation of finding that person. Now suppose somebody else is sitting there, our first reaction in terms of perception would be that we would think of that person unless there are sort of some very stark differences. Say for example, sort of one of them may be bald, the other may not be bald, but otherwise because of this habitual perception, we are very likely to think of the person who the other person concerned who's sitting on the table, who's sitting on the chair. So if we see some some person from behind, we are likely to think of the person as the person we are habituated to seeing in that particular office. So it could be of such because of such reasons our mind has this tendency to gloss over certain differences and quickly form judgment. And it may also be due to some problem with the sense organ. Say for example cataract. Another example that's very often cited in some of the texts of classical philosophy is jaundice. Some people develop a tendency to see things as yellowish when they are suffering from jaundice. So there could be several causes, different kinds of causes of errors. Also, as pointed out by Jayanta, it could also be due to pathological disorder of the bodily humors, and in the absence of any other observable cause, it could be due to adrishta, meaning merit or demerit, papa or punya, is to be assumed as the cause. If there is no apparent cause of seeing of something that is not there, then we sort of ascribe the reason as adrishta. Drishta meaning something unseen, but something that exists. So something that one happens to see because of certain unseen forces. So this is how a realist like Jayanta tends to look at it. Among Buddhists, Dharmotar enumerates and analyzes. Buddhists, as we pointed out, especially when we look at the Sanskrit literature that they have left with us, there are it starts with Shunyavadins and then develops into idealism, and only later on we have Sarvastivadins. So, but predominantly Buddhists represent idealist school of thought. So among Buddhists, Dharmotar enumerates and analyzes various causes of error and classifies them one by one in his commentary on Nyaya Bindu. Nyaya Bindu, written by Dignag. Cataract and the like are the organic causes of error. The error arising due to a journey by boat is caused by peculiar conditions of the conveyance. So, there is also this strange kind of error. We may be traveling by boat, but instead of seeing boat as moving, because we are riding on it, that's a part of our frame of reference. We see as if the trees are moving. So, and also there are errors arising out of what is called sanshobha, are often due to state of mind of the perceiver, sanshobha, grief and whatever, and the likes. In each case, the reasons for faulty appearance are subjective. So, as pointed out earlier, Buddhists being sort of predominantly idealists, inclined towards idealism, they would tend to sort of give some kind of a subjective reasons for why errors occur at all. And whereas Naiyayikas being realist, they would always try to explain errors on some realist basis. So now, defect in the condition of perception may include, meaning the causes, because defects are the causes of the error. Defects in the conditions of perception may include the following: defects in the external stimuli, meaning similarity, mobility, distance, something sort of far away distance. We are more likely to be mistaken about the nature of that thing. The movement of our conveyance, which gives rise to illusions like the parallax. Defects in the external medium of perception, alok malima sattva, meaning refraction of light. If a stick is put into water, it appears bent. Pathological disorders of the peripheral organs, pathological disorders of the bodily humors. Defects in the central sensory motors, manodosha, meaning neurological causes, and defects in the self. And apart from that, other factors may include wrong operation of the sense organ with regard to their object, asamprayoga, subconscious impressions. We may have some subconscious impressions which makes us inclined towards perceiving which kind of these some subconscious impressions interfere when we try to form judgments in our awareness, in our consciousness about a particular thing. Now, Prabhachandra, in his Prameya Kamala Martanda, in his text, speaks of 7 different theories of illusions. So, based on different causes and how these different causes are theorized, we may have several different theories of illusions. And Prabhachandra enumerates 7 of them, including akhyati, asatkhyati, prasiddhartha khyati, atma khyati, anavrichniya khyati, viparithartha khyati, smriti pramosha or viveka khyati. And Vadideva Suri, another Jaina philosopher, and Jayasimha Suri mention another theory of error called alaukikartha khyati, thus bringing the number of khyativadas to 8. One could include Sat Khyati of Ramanuja and Shad and Sad Asad Khyati of Sankhya. But in this particular lecture, we want to focus on a very different kind of problem that that is very important from the point of view of theory of perception, also very important important from the point of view of generally theory of knowledge. And that is, the classification of errors on the basis of what could be called Vishaya. So, the main point here, the epistemological and ontological concern when we classify a particular error as a nirvishaya khyati, then the main point here is that when, even in an erroneous cognition, we actually see something, we the feeling overall is, if you allow me to put it like this, we feel that there is an object. The judgment, so to speak, is categorical in nature. as I sort of pointed out by Naiyayikas, errors are, a different category of judgment, and different from, say, for example, doubt. Doubt is a kind of doubt signifies some kind of an incompletion in the judgment. We are not sure what an object is. Whereas, in a case of error, there is a certain kind of conviction with which we form a judgment, and the judgment is categorical in nature. We don't say that I'm unsure whether this object is so and so, or this object could be this or that. So doubt is not categorical in expression in the same way as erroneous cognition is. Now, so that means even in the case of error, it appears to us, it seems to us, the feeling is that something actually was known, something actually was perceived. And perception being something subjective in nature. Now, though sort of there could be another debate on this, whether perception is purely subjective or it has an element of some kind of sort of objectivity also. Earlier we have discussed Nyaya theory of perception. There we saw that Naiyayikas try to strike a very good, nice balance between sort of they don't want to believe that perception is something completely subjective in nature. It does have something, it does have some kind of an objective basis, but also at the same time it has the subjective element as well. Whereas idealists, especially subjective idealists, would would rather want us to believe that perceptions are sort of purely of the nature of subjective. Now the problem here is since in any judgment we claim to be seeing something, what is the what is this seeing of? Meaning to say, the problem here is that since in a judgment we always sort of, even if it's erroneous, we happen to see something. Therefore, there must be a reason why we happen to see something. Now, if somebody says, because in error we also know that something that is seen is not there. So there is some kind of a robust thisness or thatness when it comes to erroneous judgment. So when we say this is a snake, there is like this element of thisness, meaning some kind of sense data is reaching us. There is some kind of a subjective perception that's actually occurring. It's just that this doesn't actually correspond to what is being predicated to it. So, but if the object concerned is not the cause of what is being seen, should we therefore conclude that it is an uncaused seeing? Because that seems to be the natural sort of only other alternative left to us. If the thing seen is not there, that means the seeing of something was uncaused. It happened without a reason. Now, if we grant, theorizing it like this, then it leads us into problems, into sort of some kind of epistemological difficulties. Because if seeing of something could happen uncaused, then we should be seeing anything at any point of time, but that doesn't happen. Sort of depending upon our environment, because our cognitions, our perceptions are environmentally conditioned. It's not that at any point of time we sort of happen to see anything. So it seems to be conditioned, influenced by the environment, by our surrounding. Therefore, we wouldn't want to concede that in a case of error, seeing of something happens which is not there, therefore it is uncaused seeing. Because as pointed out, because that leads to sort of grave epistemological difficulties. But such kind of view, but also at the same time, somebody could point out there is no alternative also to it, because if we say, because in the alternative left, to explain error is to say that, well, the seeing of something happened and something that has been seen is the actually cause of seeing of that thing. But in that case, it shouldn't be error. Say, for example, let's try and understand it with the help of an example. Say, for example, when we say there is a snake in the corner of the room, and we find that there is actually no snake existing there, then if we say, well, the seeing of snake actually did happen because of the object that was perceived, namely snake, then it's not a case of error anymore, because the object has been correctly represented. And if we say, well, we formed a judgment, namely that something, this is snake or that is snake, but it is caused by not snake but rope, that would also, put us into another kind of difficulty. How can an object which is not the object under consideration could cause perception of something other than itself? Then, that would mean chair should be able to cause perception of table should be able to cause perception of ground, and so on and so forth. So, all these three alternatives to explaining error have come along with their own set of difficulties. So, one natural way of looking at errors could be that they are nirvishaya. But before we enter into the discussion of nirvishayata of error, let's first of all try to understand the term itself. There are several terms in Sanskrit that have been used regarding the content of perception and also the object of perception, and some of these terms are Vishaya, Alamban, Adhishtan. So basically, Vishaya has been used. The term Vishaya has been used as in the sense of content of perception. It's also been used in the sense of cause of perception. It's also been used in the sense of sense data which causes certain perception. So it's been used in several ways. But sort of to understand what is the difference between the content of perception and sense data in the sense of sense data is causing perception, we must understand what we basically understand by the term realism. Realism basically is an idea that knowledge has some kind of counterpart. Reality, knowledge is not confined merely to the realm of ideas. It has a real counterpart out there in the world, which is presented to us in a case of perception. But realism also could be of two kinds. One is direct realism, meaning to say that when I see a chair is presenting itself directly to me without any mediation. So there is a direct kind of a sense-object contact, and this is how Naiyayikas look at perception. This is how they theorize perception. So they are more of direct realists. But on the other hand, there's also this another theory of realism, which could be which is generally named as representational theory, where we believe that things out there in the world are real, and we come to know something that is real out there in the world when we form a judgment about something. But there is some kind of a gap between the thing known and the knowledge of it, because how it's mediated? It's mediated through some kind of representations. There are representations of a particular thing in questions that are being, that are coming to us. So sense data in that sense would be something that is coming from the object and is representative of that object and is representing that object, and this is how the real chair or a table becomes known to us. Now, why sort of knowing these sort of different kinds of realism is important for us? Because Vishaya could mean content in the sense of the perceptual content. What is the perceptual content in the sense of the mere content of seeing, mere seeing of something. Whereas, a realist, could think of Vishaya as in terms of sense data, meaning sort of presentations that are being cognized by us. So Vishaya, the term Vishaya is used in both senses. It's also used in the sense of cognitum, the thing, the thing that is known, the object that is known. But there is less confusion about some of the other terms that are used for the thing known, sort of the content of perception. Say, for example, in Buddhist philosophy, there is this term used, alamban, which means the very basis of perception of something. There is some kind of an initial basis that could be that is there before us. And there's some kind of substantial basis, if we could put it like this. So there is some kind of a substantial reality, because which causes the erroneous cognition to happen. The term that's used in Advaita, and the Advaita philosophy is adhishthana. There is some adhishthana. We may be mistaken about its nature. So adhishthana of everything is Brahman. We are mistaken about its real nature. It's without any characterization. So the moment we characterize it as this or that, we miss the point. But the adhishthana is real. The basis, the underlying basis of error is actually real. Errors happen, so to speak, as some kind of sort of modes of consciousness. So the problem lies only with the property that is ascribed to consciousness, or the property, or the shape that it assumes, the vritti. The term used is vritti in Vedanta Paribhasha, the vritti that it assumes, and we forget that beyond those vrittis there is this sort of pure consciousness, which is the adhishthana of it. So these are the different terms that have been used in Indian philosophy. Now, in Nirvishaya Khyati, basically this is the idea that errors do not have, so to speak, a cause. Because if they had a cause, then, so to speak, they shouldn't occur. Because if there is a cause, it has to be real in some sense. It has to be there in some sense. And if it's there in some sense, then it's a perception of something. And there is some kind of a counterpart to it, which would put us into problems. So, to sort of put up kind of a blanket to get beyond such issues, to sort of make the problem kind of easier for us. Somebody might say, well, errors do not have any vishaya, they do not have any content, they do not have any basis, so to speak. They just arise, so to speak, out of nowhere. And though, sort of as we can see, it's not an easy position to hold. Though this is, an easier position to hold, it's also, it seems, one of the most viable in the sense that like this is one of the alternatives which we are naturally forced to adopt when it comes to sort of, the problems that are associated with perception. So it's a sort of one of the, like, this could be one of our natural picks, so to speak. So, but though sort of it seems natural, sort of it seems more apt for somebody to believe that khyati, that erroneous cognition, viparya, could be without a vishaya, could be without any basis, but it's a very difficult position to sustain philosophically. Now, sort of let's look at nirvishaya khyati in some more detail. So, Prashashtapad in his bhashya on Vaisheshik Sutra, while discussing viparya, uses an interesting analogy to explain error. He states that there are cases when, even though there is no sense perception, the consciousness as consciousness of something seems to arise. At times, we visualize nocturnal darkness, when what a person is actually seeing is the cloudless sky, which is like the inert ocean and is as dark as a huge lump of pulverized collyrium. So, the point here is that there could be cases which, there could be cases of perception where there is nothing that we are seeing, but yet we claim to see something. So there could be seeing of something without any objective basis at all. So say, for example, nocturnal darkness in pitch dark room, or like in a sort of on a moonless night, there is some kind of absolute dark all around, and it seems as if everywhere around are huge lumps of pulverized collyrium. So it seems we happen to as if darkness is something that so that is being sort of perceived by us, even though there is nothing out there. Some of the other examples, though not of the same kind as given by Prashashtapada, could be horizon. There is there seems to be some kind of end to the world that we call horizon. Though it's not there, but we happen to see it. Similarly, some of the more modern examples, blue color of the sky. Now we know that sky is not colored. As a matter of fact, sky, as in the case of Naiyayikas, it doesn't lend itself to visual perception. But despite everything, it seems to have a color, namely blue. Therefore, similarly, seeing of black is basically seeing of no colors. When you are seeing no color, that is black. But seeing of nothing is, characterized as seeing of something. Also, some of the more modern examples could be, colors of a butterfly. Now, it's some of the more recent research tells us that actually the wings of a butterfly do not have any pigmentation. So colors could be because of pigmentation in the skin or pigmentation on the wings. Actually, many butterflies which appear to have blue color, on closer examinations it's discovered that on the wings there are no pigments with blue. So it's only because of the way the rays are being reflected, from the wings of the butterfly, that it appears as blue. And also we notice that if we take a different angle towards the wings, the color seems to change. If it had been because of pigmentation, it wouldn't have changed. So these are mere appearances without, so to speak, any objective basis. Similarly, sort of, there could be certain pathological cases. There could be certain psychological cases rather, which are sort of now known to be also pathological. There are people with split personality. They imagine things and they think of them as real. So there could be numerous examples where something sort of appears before us, whereas there is no actually sort of basis for it, so to speak, to happen. So there are like reasons for us to believe that there could be cases of error, there could be cases of vipraya, khyati, which could be categorized as, classified as nirvishaya, as without any basis at all. So, one might say in this context that what is being referred to here is a particular category of errors named nirvishaya. Problem with that would be that nirvishaya cannot be taken to mean contentless, insofar as darkness is the vishaya or content. It cannot be niralamban vipraya either, for as evidenced by the fact that Prashishtpad vividly describes the external conditions leading to the cognition in question. So, we cannot say that nirvishaya is a way of categorizing. No, this has to be a kind of a proper theory of error, a proper theorization of erroneous cognition. Because, problem here is that nirvishaya cannot be taken to mean contentless, because in the example offered by Prashishtpad, we are not seeing something that is contentless. We are characterizing it as, say for example, dark skies, dark of the night, so pitch dark of the night. So this means dark, is the object of, so to speak, seeing. Darkness is the object, is the content, so it's not without content. Also, it cannot be niralamban pratyaya, because Prashishtpad very vividly describes the environment, the conditions. That is it's a moonless night, and it's pitch dark all around. Nothing is visible even with the open eyes. So if he were to talk about niralamban vipraya, meaning sort of error which is without any objective basis, then there was no reason for Prashishtpad to describe the external conditions. So Prashishtpad is pretty sure, it seems, and then being belonging to the Nyaya Visheshika camp, he has to be a realist. So he wouldn't be taking position of niralamban. So now also one might argue here that perception is denied because there is no actual sense-object contact with nocturnal darkness in reality. But then that is true of many other cases of error. Somebody might say, well, there is no it's very difficult to explain sense-object contact, indriyarth nikarsh, which is a very important part of Nyaya definition of perception, as we know from several lectures that have been delivered in the past on theory of perception. So, somebody might point out that there is no sense-object happening here. So, it is, but that is something that doesn't happen in other cases of error too. Say, for example, if you see rope as a snake, then our eyes, our visual senses are nowhere in contact with what is being seen. Our eyes are not in contact with the silver that is being perceived, where actually, as a matter of fact, only the shell of an oyster exists. So sense-object contact is something that cannot be explained in other kinds of errors as well. So that cannot be the reason. It cannot be a case of alokik pratyaksh also, because something seems to be perceived here which seems to be right before our eyes. It meaning to say it cannot be a case of, say, for example, Jnana Lakshana, because where we claim to sort of see a fragrant rose. So from a distance we say, well, look at that fragrant rose. Even though from a distance we don't have the smell of the rose, but we know it. Somehow in our mind, we perceive it as fragrant. And that happens because of that may happen because of some special kind of extrasensory perception that's named as alaukik pratyaksh. So that device also cannot help us here, because we seem to perceive something right before our eyes. Now, another important philosopher, Srinivasa, states in his commentary named Nyayasar, he says, a certain section of Advaitins, actuated by zeal for avoiding the irrationality in respect of subsequent sublation of an invalid cognition in general, or as sought to be established in the theory of Nirvachaniya Khyati, assert that cognitions of the nacre silver type have no content at all. So this theory is ascribed by some other philosophers like Srinivasa to Advaitins, because their Anirvachaniya Khyati, according to them, is a kind of species of Nirvishaya Khyati, because according to them, ultimately, thing is of no nature at all. I mean, the ultimate nature is Brahman, which is pure existence, pure consciousness. But we always see something, think as something. So all characterizations are equally wrong, but yet the seeing happens. So Advaitins describe it as anirvachaniya. Seeing happens, and it seems to be true insofar as we don't have a higher platform. So far as we get onto that higher platform, it seems to us real. Therefore, it is categorized as anirvachaniya khyati, something that cannot be categorized as this or that. So Srinivasa looks at Advaitins somewhere taking resort to Nirvishaya Khyativad. Now, if an invalid cognition has a content, what on earth, further he argues, if an invalid cognition has a content, what on earth does throw it into disrepute and taint it as invalid? If it actually has a content, then there is no reason why we should call it erroneous. So they would argue it has no content, and only then can it be contradicted and sublated. So if it is without content, then it can be contradicted. The point here is that in a situation of error, it is two different cognitions, one of which is supposed to be true and therefore have a priority, have an edge over the other. So these are two mere cognitions, namely this is a piece of silver, the other one, this is a piece of oyster shell. And both of the cognitions have an equal status vis-a-vis Brahman, say for example. Both are equally wrong. Therefore, but yet, one is prioritized over the other, and there could be no reason for that, because both of them are, from the point of view of Brahman, from the point of view of ultimate reality, both are equally wrong. So somewhere they have to, perforce, admit of lack of vishaya, of particular perception, particular case of perception. This is what Srinivasa tells us. But consider the fact that both of these cognitions are cognitions per se. Why do we prioritize one over the other? Furthermore, what is sublated or superseded? Is it the cognition or the cognitum? So there's further another set of problems that arises. So what is sublated in this case? We cannot even talk of sublation, that something is known as wrong and something else is known as true. So is it the case, is it the cognition itself that is superseded? So when we know that this is a piece of silver to be a mistaken cognition, and therefore is is sublated in favor of this is an oyster shell. What is what is superseded in this case? Is it only the cognition or the cognitum, thing that is cognized? or merely we alter our behavior in the sense that when we thought of it as silver, we wanted to procure it. But when we realize there is a piece of oyster shell, we are no more interested in it. So is it the cognition that alters? In which case, both of them would be mere cognitions, and there wouldn't be any reason of prioritizing one over the other. If it's a case of cognitum, then we need to explain how an error can occur without an object, because in that case, anything should be seen anywhere. And it cannot also be sort of a case of simply change of behavior. If it is just cognition, then what differentiates one cognition from the other, since both of them are cognitions per se? If it is a case of cognitum, then that has remained unchanged. The object of cognition has remained unchanged in both the cases. In other words, no separate object of cognition has been recreated for the so-called true cognition. Now, another important philosopher, namely Venkatanatha, who is Vishishtadvaitin and who is who's supposed to have authored many philosophical texts, and who is a Vishishtadvaitin. So Venkatanath, who is a Vishishtadvaitin, criticizes Nirvishaya Khyati on the grounds that the opponent has to define what is meant by Nirvishayatva. It may mean the non-existence of the Vishaya, namely which means cognitum, which would make it non-different from Asat-Khyati. If Nirvishaya means non-existence of the Vishaya or the object of cognition, then it is tantamount, Nirvishaya Khyati is tantamount to Asat Khyati, because Asat Khyati also states that the thing cognized is asat, it doesn't exist. Sat meaning isness, so it doesn't exist. Alternatively, one might call it indescribable subsistence or mithyatva, which would fling open the gates for nirvachani khyati. If we call it mithyatva, something of untruth, then it comes close to nirvachani khyati. So truth and untruth become relative terms. It may even mean in that case absence of Vishaya in particular locus. So somebody might say, well, the only problem here is that we are seeing of something is happening which is not located at the place where it is being seen. But then in that case it would be non-different from Anyatha Khyati. So the point here is Venkatanath points out, and since he's in Vishisht Advaitin, so and Vishisht Advaitin is a realist position of a kind. Therefore, he would be opposed to the view that there could be errors, there could be cognitions without any basis at all. So he says we already have three alternatives, and Nirvishayata, Nirvishayatva of Nirvishaya Khyati could be subsumed under these any of these three alternatives. Now, apart from these three alternatives, the only other alternative left with the opponent is to state that no object appears in an invalid cognition, but that would be contradiction insofar as it is cognition of silver, which means that silver appears in perception. How can there be cognition of silver though no silver appears in it? Thus this theory stands self-condemned. So the only alternative apart from these three is that somebody might state that there is no object being revealed. There is there is a perception without any object, but that never happens. Judgment is only of is always of the nature of this as being something, meaning there is subject and there is a predicate. This is chair, this is table. So there is cognition of something definite. So even in the case of silver, there is a cognition of silver. So this alternative would be self-contradictory, because the very judgment is of the form, as representative of something. So such kind of position is self-contradictory. Venkatanath further in his text Sarvartha Siddhi suggests that this theory was upheld by Buddhist schools. In 30th shloka of this work, in the 4th chapter called Buddhisara, he states, now are being refuted the different views put forward by the Buddhists accepting extra mental reality. Further, now the author presents Niradhisthana Khyati as advanced by some Buddhists accepting extra mental reality. So, whereas some philosophers ascribe this theory to Advaitins, there are certain others like Venkatanatha who ascribe it to Buddhist idealists. So we would carry on our discussion with Nirvishaya Khyati and also some another Khyati very close to it called Niradhisthana Khyati. And also sort of Akhyati. They could all be three of them could be clubbed together because some way or the other, all of them deny any objective basis or any sort of kind of basis in the content of perception to erroneous cognition. So we'll continue our discussion on this theme in our next lecture. That is all for today. Thank you.